All right, so just by way of introduction, really want to welcome Duncan.
My name is Duncan Todd, principal at HD, in my second year as principal, my 11th year in the school. And we're a school we're in Hamilton, or just outside Hamilton in Ancaster, which is a sort of suburb of Hamilton. We have around 480 students, grade 9 to 12. And we've been on a similar journey, I think, as London Christian High for the last decade or so, looking at how learning is developing and evolving and how particularly Christian learning is needing to grow. So yeah, we're a well-established community. The school is over 60 years old, so there's a lot of history that goes with that. And yet, being the same as London Christian High, being a single high school, we're quite nimble, that we're able to adapt quite quickly to change and to some of the new research in education. So that's who we are. Tim, how about LCH?
So London Christian High is many same things that Duncan was talking about. We've been around for about 56 years now or so a fairly similar amount of time. About 220 or so students at the school, serving a pretty wide geographical region, multi-denominational, so many different churches represented here. But really the vision or the central purpose of the school being to provide Christian education that's based on Jesus Christ to our students. And we've been doing that for, well over 50 years now. So
yeah, I mean, there's so much similarity in what we're doing in our schools, which there should be, because we're both focused on Christian education, Christ-centered or Christ-oriented education, trying to bring our kids up to find their place in God's world, to know their calling, and to step into that, to walk into that. And I guess high school is a place of discovery for a lot of kids. They're discovering who they are, what their gifts are, what their calling is, and so we're doing that together. It's good to do that with colleagues.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. Hey, I'm wondering if you can start, Duncan. What are you trying to accomplish today that might be different than like 10, 15, 20 or more years ago, right? For people who may not have been in high school for a little while. What are you guys working on? I know it's many of the same themes for us, but I'm always interested in what you guys are doing at HDCH.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So it's I guess it's not going to be strange language to you or anyone attached to LCH. One of the quotes I like to use to sum up the way education has changed, and particularly the way we view education, is one from the Irish poet W.B. Yeats, who said, at least it's attributed to him, I'm not sure if he actually said it, education is not filling a bucket, but lighting a fire. And that old concept of filling kids with information, and that somehow filling them with information would lead to transformation, I think has been challenged. And it's been challenged not just by research in neuroscience research and educational research and sociological research, but I think in our understanding of Scripture and who people are, looking at people not just as heads, but as hearts and hands as well, as whole beings, as spiritual beings. We try and look at a type of education that, well, you speak about project-based learning as well, and it's a way of contextualizing learning for kids, so that through inquiry, through discovery, curriculum is uncovered. It's connected in the context of real world projects, real world work that they're doing. We locate that in again, broadly philosophically, we locate that in the sort of the creation, fall, redemption, restoration narrative, the grand narrative, and in trying to help kids find their place in that narrative and their calling, their vocation in that narrative, we would locate the work that they do for school in that narrative. So kids are, through projects, identifying, exploring maybe the brokenness in the world or the need in our surrounding community, finding something that is a need or that's broken, a problem that needs to be solved, and then working to become solutionaries, find through their work what restorative work is already happening in this area, where God's redemptive purposes are being worked out, and a project connected to that to create something beautiful, maybe to shift culture, to fix a problem, to begin to work against some of the brokenness in our world. So that's in very broad strokes, and I'd love to share some maybe more specifics about some of those projects, for example, how we do those things. But when the curriculum is connected to something really purposeful, really meaningful for the kids, the learning goes so much deeper. We use this mantra, we say deeper in, further out. And those two are probably interchangeable. Further out means deeper in. When their learning is not just, hey, you need to know this because it's going to be on the test, or one day this will be useful to you, but actually there's something you're working on, a problem in our city or in our community that we're trying to solve. And I need to know these things in order to work on this. Suddenly there's a much deeper motive and purpose in the kids' learning, and that makes the learning so much deeper.
Yeah,
I can elaborate on that a lot, but I think it's similar to what you guys are talking about. How do you sort of express your learning philosophy in broad strokes?
Yeah. So for us, I mean, we think about things, Christian learning from a distinctively Christian perspective in the 21st century. We've sort of broken that down into two words that we hope are memorable and sort of actionable in our community. And the two words are people and purpose. So
I love that. Yeah.
What's that?
I love that. That's great.
Yeah. A lot of schools had three words, so we went with two, just to make it
just to be different.
Just to make it memorable. But the people part of it really is, it sounds unremarkable on its face, but the people part, of course, from a Christian perspective, we think about biblical verses like Psalm 139, where it talks about, human beings being fearfully and wonderfully made. And so automatically there's a different understanding going on in terms of the way that we view, the human beings, the students that come in and out the doors every day here. Everybody's got their own story. Everybody has their own strengths, their own weaknesses, the things they're working on. And so that's where we start. That's where we meet students. And that creates a certain kind of school in and of itself, right? Because not every private school in particular works with just every student, for example. Right. I mean, some do, but not everyone does. So automatically now you're down the track on a certain kind of vision. Right. The purpose part, we talk about here, we would think about biblical verses like Jeremiah 29:11, which is a pretty popular verse in a lot of contexts. Yeah. But just a deeper sense that God's got a plan for each one of us. Of course, the context for Jeremiah 29:11 is actually a pretty rough context, right? It's the Israelites in exile, and really, does God have a plan for us? I mean, I think everybody's been at that point in their lives, perhaps at multiple points, right? But we hold strong to that and hold fast to that because we do believe that everybody has a plan and a purpose, and as a result, the education is going to look different, right? And so, sidebar here, you and I talked about how long should we make this video, and I'm not sure how long we've been going already, but it couldn't be 5 or 10 minutes, right? By the time you say all these things, there's so much depth and richness in the traditions that we're standing in. It takes a little while to get it all out. So, hey,
can I ask you a follow-up question, Tim?
Go ahead. Yeah,
I love the way you've spoken about. So you Psalm 139 to talk about each of us fearfully and wonderfully made, and maybe sure that has its origin right in creation and made in God's image. And you've spoken about that in terms of your understanding of your own students. Yeah. But I also heard you talking about your connection to your community and the partnerships with that, Christian or non-Christian. It sounds to me there's a sense that you also have that view of other people in your community. So, and I think that connects in some ways philosophically with what we talk about. Our mission is it's cultivating character through learning for lives of service to God. That's our why, for lives of service to God. And it seems part of that is connecting to recognizing all people in our surrounding communities as image bearers as well as bearing the image of God. So can you talk a bit about how you sort of just touched on it, I think, how you see people in your community, how that connects to your understanding of your mission as a school?
Yeah, that's a great question, because again, so now we're kind of going into it, but when you think about the arc of the biblical story, or who God is, or how Christ came to earth and the ways that he operated, I think about, like, you could go all the way back to the Old Testament, like Abraham, right? The understanding that you're blessed, you are blessed, but you're blessed to be a blessing, right?
Yeah.
So it's for something. And so you can live in that blessing, and that's a beautiful thing, right? But the natural outflow of that is to be a blessing to other people.
I love what you said about, the call to Abraham, I have blessed you, you will be a blessing. Mm-hmm. And that concept for our kids, so often for our kids, and this is where projects have been, and the learning has been so helpful, because so often for our kids, we identify a local problem or a need, and they straight away jump to, okay, well, let's raise money. Let's do this. They got all sorts of ideas for raising funds to give money to this thing. And that there's nothing wrong with that. I think, what's it, 1 Timothy 6 speaks about God giving us all things richly to enjoy, and speaks about giving generously and laying up treasures for yourself in heaven that way. But it's so much richer than just money. And when our students start discovering that actually the work they're doing and the work they're doing now in school can actually be a great blessing to a community, and that's where I'd actually love to hear more specifically from you on some examples of that. So for us, I could talk about just a small way in which our students, so grade 9s in our design and tech block, have made little free libraries, which they've contacted people in various communities, and that was part of their design process and learning how to design things on a computer, how to make prototypes, how to then communicate with the recipient of this thing to say, what would you look aesthetically pleasing outside your church or this community center, wherever they're going to locate them, and then actually build these things. So great, they uncovered and went through a lot of curriculum doing this, but it was a way of serving our community, of blessing our community. They've made benches in that class, those sort of projects as well. But and I could talk about hundreds of projects, but I'd love to hear some of your examples of in actual specific ways in which you through their learning and the way they're doing learning at school are being a blessing.
Well, and so if I could just stop you for 1 second, though, because I think
hard to stop me.
What's that?
Hard to stop me once I get going.
It's hard to stop you. It's cool though. I think I'd love to hear some more examples from you as well, in terms of making it concrete for people, because we've kind of talked in generalities in the biblical story, and again, we could do a whole session just on where Christian schools are in the biblical story. But to make it concrete, I love your example of the mini libraries, or the mobile libraries, or the
little free libraries.
Little free libraries. Yep. So when you think, could I just stop you there though for 1 second?
Yeah.
Think about that project, and think about maybe 20 years ago in education. What would have been the emphasis in a shop class maybe 20 years ago versus this sort of shift towards mini libraries, right? And it's not like black and white. It's not to say this wasn't being done 20 years ago, but there's you mentioned this already. There's a certain emphasis that's being placed on sort of authentic learning, or community connected learning in general, right? I wonder if you could comment on that just for a minute, if you want to use the library option, or the library example as a example.
So for sure, and take that as a sort of example of woodshop. Now that had depth to it, because they were also communicating. They were finding and finding a place. Sometimes it was a church, sometimes it was a seniors residence, sometimes it was just a residential area where people might want a little free library. So there was that aspect. There was the design, the concept design on drafting software on the computer, learning to do that, and then learning to do 3D prints of prototypes before actually building a model, and then building a small prototype, and all this time communicating back and forth with the recipients. But basically they were learning all sorts of shop skills in building these little free libraries. You said 20 years ago, maybe it was a little longer than 20 years ago. I was doing a shop class in high school. we were focused very much on a particular skill, but that skill was in isolation to any sense of real context or purpose. So we were learning mortise and tenon joints. We were learning how to do joining, how to do these things. And then eventually the big final culminating thing was perhaps I built a bookshelf. In fact, I remember building a bookshelf for myself in boarding school. So that was the final product. I learned some skills, and then I learn these skills and then apply them. That's great. A lot of the skills were sort of in isolation, but you had a sense, okay, I'm learning to do more and more complex skills so that I can finally put something together and make something useful. So it's skills training and skills building without a clear idea of how that fits in with the big picture. Not just the big picture of what you're actually going to make, but the big picture of how what you're going to make fits in with God's story. So these kids in making these little free libraries, they had to make a post and this thing on it and work out how to join things and make it stable, and basically building a little miniature house. They would build it like a 2-story house with a big door that opens and a roof on it. Some of them shingled their roofs, cut shingles to a particular size and made them. They had to work out what kind of books were going to go in there, and they'd have the 2 shelves for people to share books. So they learned an awful lot of shop skills by doing it, but it was always not just learning the skill for its own sake or for self-development, but actually for service, to do something of service in God's kingdom, in God's world, or in God's redemptive, restorative purposes in the world. So that was the kind of way in which the learning happens. And it's almost as if the learning is kind of a byproduct of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. We need to do this. I'll give you another example of something I saw in a college math class. Mm-hmm. And again, this is a building example, so maybe it's more concrete. We had a dead area around the back of our school, and a grade 12, 4C, the college level math class. Kids came back from co-op, and you know what it's like having these grade 12 kids. You don't want to be in the classroom when they've experienced co-op in the world of work. They did not want to sit in the classroom. And one of our teachers, phenomenal teacher, Owen Webb, spent some time planning with these kids what they could do meaningfully. And they built a patio out the back of our school, which is a beautiful area now, still used, and it's of great service within our own school community, obviously, because it's on our school grounds. But Owen didn't have to teach them formulae and how to do slope and gradient. When these kids said, we're building this thing, the water has to run away from the building codes say, whatever it was, 1 inch over 5 or something. They would then come to Owen and say, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make sure it slopes away? What are the formulae for gradient? Now, they want to learn these things. He's not telling them, guys, today we're doing slope and gradient. So get out your books. Here's the formula. Here's some 10 examples to work on it. They were learning their math because they had to know this. They really needed this to do what they wanted to do. So whether it was area of irregular shape and volume of irregular shapes, to work out how much sand they needed to order and the cost of the stuff, they did so much of their math curriculum came out because we need to know how to do this. So the motivation of those students was not, the teachers didn't have to motivate them and say, you better learn this formula because it's going to be on the test on Friday. Instead, they were saying, we need to get this right, or this whole thing's a disaster. Anyway, I've gone on too long with my example. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great example, right? It's like, building a boat that you actually need to sail in, and like you'll figure out.
Stakes are higher than just the mark. You're not just doing it for the teacher's red pen and a grade at the end. You're doing it because it has to work.
Yeah. That's a great story. Yeah, you asked earlier about an example from our school too. I think like you've listed 2 off there that are pretty cool, and I mean, we could sit here all day. Again, maybe it's another episode, but we could sit here all day and talk about all the different sort of project style or, blessed to be a blessing kind of style learning that's going on in many Christian schools these days. Yeah. One that really jumps to mind for me just recently, and this is a pretty large scale one, but we had a shop class decide to partner with a nonprofit overseas in Africa. So it's
Can you say where in Africa? Because
Tanzania.
Oh, Tanzania, East Africa. Yeah. Lovely.
They decided to partner with an organization out there that was involved in helping local schools,
Right.
schools with resources, et cetera. And so what they eventually decided to do was actually to take a 40-foot long steel shipping container, like one of those humongous things on a
Yeah.
like a rail trail.
Yeah.
And they decided to outfit it into a mobile classroom. So they put desks and air conditioning and electrical and you name it, like everything. And then they learned an awful lot about international politics, about how to actually get this thing over there. And
Right.
it took the whole semester. It's pretty
Yeah.
neat project on a different level in that respect. But there was never a question about why are we doing this again? Like, why are we learning how to frame, or why are we learning this electrical? Like, it was sort of an all hands on deck kind of experience, and pretty neat on many levels. And actually, our community really got behind it as well from a financial perspective, which was pretty cool. So that was one of the larger kinds of examples. But again, I would think to go back to what you were saying. I mean, you could do so many different things in almost any class, right? Whether it's a shop class or whatever, and you can think about these things in isolation, which isn't always bad. It's not necessarily a bad thing to do, but increasingly, I think what we're trying to do is trying to embed these ideas or concepts into a larger story, or try to be consistent about the bigger story. So.
Yeah. I could give a cool example, because these have been pretty hands-on examples, and some of the ones actually, this is 3 classes combined to do a beautiful project. Just a kind of, I think this is a reflection of God's character. Sometimes God does things just because it's beautiful, just because it's fun. And 3 of our classes, it was a grade 9 geography class, a drawing and painting class, and I think it was a senior programming class, combined to do a project in the Dundas Valley. It's a beautiful conservation area. And do you know what geocaching is?
I do, actually, yeah.
Okay, so it's when you scan the barcode, takes you to the website. So what our geographers went ahead and they went on a hike in the valley with the art class, and they chose a spot on this sort of the circuit route. They chose a spot that they would like to do. Individuals did, sort of, or in pairs. And the geographers had to work out the exact coordinates and get all that right. And the artist took some pictures around. It was in the autumn. So they took some beautiful pictures. Then they came back and they painted, they did a landscape painting of that area. The programming class created a website where these pictures could be uploaded to the website, and a QR code for scanning. And then the geographers had to go back, make sure they had the right coordinates, the exact right spot, and make the geocache there, so that when people found it, they could actually scan the QR code, and up would come a beautiful painting by one of our students, and they'll go, oh, this, maybe they're there in the summer and say, this looks like the autumn, and it looks as if we're looking that way at those 2 trees. More than a year later, we were walking as a group of staff in that area, and one of our staff was looking at his geocaching app and said, oh, there's one near here, and we found it, and there was one of our students painting. So that's just a fun thing to do for your community, just because it's for no one in particular, and for everyone. So I love the way. Also, it is hands-on, but it was a small project for the grade 9 geographers. It wasn't a massive project for them. It was a bigger project for the programming class to create websites and QR codes and things like that. And they've done some amazing. I could talk endlessly about some of the projects they've done. But it was also a fun way of working together with other classes and doing something.
That is really cool, and like that's a growing trend too, I think, in education in general. But is the combining of subjects, right, or combining of disciplines, which is again kind of a real world way to think about learning, right? Learning and production and design and all of those kinds of things. Actually, it's funny that you say geocaching, because I could just quickly throw in another one. But one of our phys ed leadership classes did something really similar just recently, actually, with the idea to, with COVID, I know you've said this before too, there's so many restrictions on what teachers can do, in terms of getting out and being connected to the community and blessing the community and those kinds of things. But what some of our students came up with here was to work with our local elementary schools, actually, and sort of set up a an opportunity for them to still be involved in some outdoor activities. So they did a very similar kind of thing to what you're sort of describing there with geocaching, which is kind of neat.
Yeah.
There's been a huge amount of creativity by teachers during COVID, for sure, right? There's been, and even in the midst of the challenges, there's been some really pretty neat stuff that's come out of it.
Yeah. I can think also, I mean, it has opened people's minds. One of the parts of the learning is often calling in experts. And for a teacher to phone someone and say, are you available this day? And can you come in and spend this time with our class is quite a big deal and a lot to organize and also a lot to ask of someone. So classes that are working on projects, often the teacher is not the repository of all knowledge and information in that subject, much as we like to think we are sometimes. But the ability to be able to reach out to experts in the field, in the real world, I think it's always been there, but it's been sort of discovered more during COVID, because we've had these incredible people from far away Zoom into our classes, and now the kids are all used to Zoom, and everyone's used to Zooming or whatever other Google Meets or something they use. But to come into the classroom and meet with the kids and talk to them, those have been amazing learning experiences and parts of the learning process when kids are able to be in touch with experts in the field that they're looking into. I've got examples from before COVID, but they work equally well in COVID. One of the projects, actually I did this teaching a grade 9 French class. We connected with a class of kids the same age in Burundi, which is also in sort of Central Africa, just near Uganda, the Rift Valley, the Great Lakes sort of region of Africa. And it's a Francophone country. So we had students really just sending questions and asking, and then putting together a comparative biography. They each had a partner in that school, and they communicated with them through email, and they would exchange some photos and things, and then they would put a comparative biography together. This is my life, in French, of course, and this is the other student's life. And it was a way for them all to see both their common humanity, to connect with this kid on the other side of the world almost, and also to see some of the differences and some of the challenges these kids faced. It was a beautiful learning experience. It's hard to put that exactly in a sort of service module, but it's certainly, I guess, a way of celebrating God's image in all of us and that sort of thing. So there are ways in which, and that during COVID is a perfectly doable project.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? One thing I know we've talked about before, but I think sort of fits in to this conversation too, is that, I think Christian schools obviously view this through a Christian lens or from a Christ-centered lens. Yeah. But what I think one thing that is interesting to note is that regardless of faith-based schools or not, or even colleges, universities, or across education, there's a huge push towards authentic, meaningful, relevant kinds of learning, right? And actually there's a growing body of research that's pretty consistently demonstrating that for the learner, if the process is meaningful, they actually remember it better, and they're able to even write a test about it better. They're able to apply it in different situations. I find it interesting. The way I would phrase it, I don't know how you would phrase it, but I would sort of phrase it as, if it's a biblically normative idea, it actually works in real life. It's kind of a simple way to put it, but there's these biblical truths that just work in life.
Well, exactly. Research often confirms what biblical principles have been teaching us all along, and then suddenly a neuroscientist comes up and says, this is how the brain works and remembers and develops and learns. You go, yep, it's there in Scripture. So I think you're absolutely right. The connection to meaning, and here's a neuroscience connection. We know that we're receiving information all the time, and our brains are constantly having to filter out what is not relevant or necessary, and put into storage, and creating long-term memories and deep memories is done when it's considered to be important or relevant. So that's something we do naturally. When the learning locks into that,
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a kid manually trying to override that system by saying, I have to know this because it's in the test tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to just cram it in. And we know what happens after that. And research has shown that
Mm-hmm.
3 months down the line, well, even 3 days down the line, it's gone when they don't need it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The brain puts that into sort of short-term urgent memory thing because you forced it there.
Mm-hmm.
But that learning doesn't actually stick in the same way. When it's meaningful and it's understood by you to have a connection to something that's actually important and valuable to you, it connects with your values. You don't have to force it into your long-term memory. It's there, and as you say, sort of, we don't learn for tests, but tests do show something about what's remembered, at least what's retained. And some of the research has shown kids, top academic kids in a 4U physics course, acing an exam. The exact same exam is given to them 3 months later after the summer, and they've lost a lot of it. They're certainly not getting A's anymore. They're getting sort of C's and D's in that exam. And yet the stuff, when things are done, and this is where, whether it's projects or some kind of meaningful connection, that stuff sticks. And it doesn't just stick for as long as the exam. It sticks forever, probably, in the memories. And certainly when they reaccess and use it, have to use it again.
Yeah. It's certainly fascinating, interesting, because more and more, organizations and individuals and universities are doing research on this all the time. Yeah. And by this, I mean sort of this push towards meaningful kind of
authentic learning.
Yeah. And it's just interesting to see that come out and to see the trends sort of move in that direction. Is there, Duncan, we're nearing the end of our time here together, at least for this segment, but, if you think about like meaningful learning, we've listed a bunch of examples here from your school, from my school, from Hamilton Christian High, from London Christian High. What, from a distinctly Christian perspective, maybe just to close, how would you think about Christian education in the 21st century? Like, what are we, maybe by way of summary or by way of closing, what are we really trying to do?
That's a great question, Tim. And I probably need to think more deeply about this. I would say one thing, though, the difference in being right,
yeah,
and trying to say this is the correct, right doctrine, and we've grown out of the Reformed Christians tradition. So here is the singular Reformed Christian perspective on this thing. It's important to be able to discern biblical truth and to see how the Bible speaks into everything. But we're not cramming kids with doctrine. The shift from being right to making right. And our kids, as believers, we're called to be ambassadors, to be peacemakers, to be people who make right. There's brokenness in the world, and we're called to be co-laborers with the Spirit, co-laborers with Christ in making things right. And so I think that's a shift, and in that becomes this idea of service, of purpose and meaning. All the skills that are 21st century skills that research is telling us are important, like collaborative skills, critical thinking skills, all those things come out through our students looking to make things right, to turn our world right side up.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to put that. It's sort of like a nice little package phrase to sort of think about there. Did you just come up with that?
Not all of it. These things have been mulling over for some time. Yeah, but no, that's fairly fresh. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Of course, like many of our schools, started out in the Reformed tradition and are obviously still very embedded there. And there's lots of beauty. Yeah. There's lots and lots of beauty in that.
Yeah.
It's something for sure to build on and to continue to move on into the future into. I don't know if you're familiar with this phrase, always reforming. So it's the sort of idea that you're building on the tradition and trying to make sense of life in the 21st or 22nd or 23rd century, et cetera, which I think is kind of a cool concept. And as we build on that tradition, being able to make sense of life and help students make sense of life in the 21st century in schools, I think Christian schools just increasingly play this outsized role, really, in the life of students. There's on the one hand, there's increasing pressures on schools all the time. I mean, that'd be a whole nother topic, but there's mental health, and there's, during COVID in particular, like people struggling to make it to church or get to church or be connected in a church community, or there's more diversity in that respect. But students, families are in many ways counting on Christian schools to be engaged in areas of life in just new ways all the time. And I think it's a pretty cool time to be involved in Christian education, to be able to partner with families and students, imperfectly, of course, right? Everybody's
maybe have another whole episode on how we mess up.
Yeah, we'll save that one till like the very end, right? But,
right.
Sure. But humbly, with Christ, doing the best that we can. But I love the idea, just by way of closing, I love the idea that Christian schools, just like any other Christian organization, but I mean, obviously we work in Christian schools, are embedded in this larger biblical story and trying to live that out in really authentic ways in our local communities, right? It's a pretty neat thought.
Well, we have a beautiful calling, actually. It's a wonderful calling as Christian schools, to be the salt and light, to make a difference in our communities, to be places where youngsters are trained for lives of impact, for lives of faithful service. So yeah, I love the calling that we have as Christian educators and as Christian schools.
Duncan, you've given us a really great way to end there with your great quote and your great smile, and I'm gonna leave it there. I really enjoyed the time with you, and again, these are kind of like conversations that we'd sit around having sometimes in PD Day contexts, or different contexts where we'd run into each other, conventions and things like that. It's the reason that we get up out of bed in the morning, right? We love this kind of stuff, and it's for sure a calling, and we feel honored and blessed to be able to serve in our communities and just to work with the families that we do each day. And I'm just grateful for you and the work that you guys are doing at HDCH.
And back at you, Tim. Always fun and always a joy talking with you, Tim.